Just days ago, we were experiencing the calm of what is known as the dead period of college football and the college football calendar, even with NIL and the transfer portal making things a bit more active in this calendar year. But bam, we get hit with a sledgehammer for Hawkeye fans. And we invite you in now for the next 60 minutes to join the conversation, of course, and leave your comments and your questions. It's Iowa Hawkeyes live here at the Voice of College Football on another Tuesday afternoon/evening with Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Had a few hours to think more about the news today, and so we can certainly talk about that. I've got some qualities here written down that I'm feeling, some emotions that I've felt throughout the day today, Mark, and I'll share that with some of the people. And yes, if I'm hyperbolic with some of these words, these terms, that's fine. But the number one word that I came up with when I first heard the news that Brian Ferentz had been moved to the quarterback position, along with being offensive coordinator, was disillusioned. I've become disillusioned. Hopefully that's temporary because I love the Hawks, but right now I'm disillusioned. Disappointed is number 2 on my list, Mark. Dismayed is 3. Disheartened comes in 4th place. Discouraged comes in 5th. I'm not to distraught yet. I'm not yet to distraught. I hope I don't get to that point. I think if you get distraught, you're probably taking sports too seriously. But all the other qualities ring true. I am, like I said, how many hours now since that news broke from Pete Thamel of ESPN, and I'm just disappointed. I mean, that would be the one word that I don't want to. That's the one word that perfectly sums up how I'm feeling. There are some people out there that are, I guess, happy that Brian Ferentz has been moved to that position. We can all be hopeful, Mark. We can hope that it works out. We can hope that Brian Ferentz will make a big difference with quarterback play, and I sure hope he does. I really do. I want him to succeed. But the bottom line is, there's no reason, at least for me, to have any sort of confidence that this move is going to make. Now, the Abdul Hodge news, I've gotten ripped today because I was somewhat critical of that hire. I wasn't overly critical. I just said, look, he's never coached tight ends. Mark, he was a linebacker at Iowa and a linebacker in the NFL, and a darn good one. But he's never coached tight ends that I'm aware of, unless he coached at the high school level. He most recently was at South Dakota as an outside linebackers coach. I have no problem bringing him on. It should help with the diversity and inclusion issues, having another black coach on staff. And again, Abdul Hodge. I met Abdul Hodge when I was young, and he was very nice to me. It was at a spring game, and that kind of stuck with me over the years. So I've got a lot of respect for Abdul Hodge. I have no question that he's, going to be successful. I mean, I don't know if his future is as a tight ends coach, but that's how he's getting on the staff initially, and maybe he'll succeed. I'm not saying he can't. I am I question it though, and I think it's okay to question that, even about somebody who we know to be a good person and maybe a good coach. Brian, I've even made the statement about Brian, Mark, that I think Brian would probably be a good tight ends coach here. He looked like a pretty good tight ends coach briefly in the NFL when he was with the Patriots. But again, going back to Brian Ferentz being the quarterback's coach, what reason do we have to believe that he is qualified to be the quarterback's coach, Mark? He's never coached quarterbacks. He's never played quarterbacks. Why is he coaching quarterbacks? Just explain it to me.
So when I first heard the news, it was out of your mouth. It was so if you can't get enough of this story, we're certainly going to cover it here for the next 60 minutes. But I would advise and encourage everyone to head on over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey went live for 60 minutes, 90 minutes,
about 90.
A couple hours earlier today, and took phone calls. So that was quite interesting, riveting at times. And so I would encourage you to head on over there and check out Corey's work this afternoon, and the tremendous feedback that we received from all of you concerning the moves that were made. So, wow, this speaks of, I hate to use the word, it's a word that's used many times in the chat, nepotism. It also speaks of possible nepotism is a strong word in and of itself, but in regards to just going an easy route to fill a role, and also a bit of, again, I don't know that this is the exact word I'm looking for, but a bit of laziness to fill the role and not going through various avenues to see who would be the best fit out there, who would be the best qualified. I chuckled when I saw the news because I thought, why didn't I think of that? I know that you had and mentioned it to Coach Tom Patterson during one of your shows, but I didn't think of it. Now, I didn't, leaning on you for our Iowa football expertise. I got to tell you, I didn't give I didn't know who the candidates were other than from our conversation, give it much thought whatsoever. Had I given it maybe a couple minutes of thought, based on how business is done there, it doesn't surprise me. And I should have guessed.
And how is business done there, Mark? Tell us.
I just think there's a conservative approach, and I don't say that conservative, that can be taken, certainly depending on the situation and what the situation calls for, can be a wise way to go, but it can also be a very restricting way to go. But a conservative approach to say we're going to keep this in-house, we're going to keep it with people we know, whether those people are family members or just longtime connections within the culture, within the staff. I think it's good to have a core of that, but if you don't frequently go outside the walls of the football program to bring in fresh blood, new ideas, fresh approach, new energy, I think you can become complacent. This is a program that, on the conservative side, has sown and therefore reaped stability and consistency. But also on the downside, we see a stale offense from year to year. And we see a lack of ingenuity and creativity on that side of the ball. And we see similar results, which are mundane and pedestrian.
I said last week, Mark, that there is a narrative with the fans at times that they believe Kirk takes the easy way out with hires. And having Brian Ferentz come work for him, having his son-in-law work for him, bringing Ken O'Keefe back from the NFL to be quarterback's coach, and then this one. I'm not saying I always agree with that. As you know, Mark, I do have a lot of respect. I've always had a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz. I think he does things the right way. I think he's a really good human being. But I think his judgment's being clouded by his children right now, specifically his son, Brian. And I'm not saying it's even Brian's fault. This is on Kirk, and it's on Gary Barta as the AD. And I'll give you an example. I can see the scenario playing out. So Iowa goes into 2022, and Iowa's offensive passing attack becomes better. Say we get up to, from 120 in the country by some metrics to 100, which is an improvement, but still pretty darn bad, Mark. But I can just hear the haters or the naysayers or the defenders of Brian and Kirk coming forward and saying, we told you so, that this was the solution. See, we're trending in the right direction. And I guess what I would say to that, Mark, is two things. You can't get much worse than they were last year. Okay. That's just a fact. So I think it would be hard for anybody who's coming in there to take over that position to go backwards and to continue falling in the rankings, because they're near the bottom of the FBS right now. So logic would tell you, common sense would tell you, whoever's in there is going to improve somewhat. They don't need a somewhat improvement. They need a pretty substantial improvement just to get up to average, which is all they need. They need to get up to average. Second thing I'll say on this is perhaps it works, and I hope it does. I hope it does. But it would be like, Mark, you and I are walking downtown New York at midnight, all right? And we're heading for a restaurant. I don't know what restaurants are open at midnight, but we're heading downtown New York at midnight, and you decide you're going to cut through a dark alley. All right, because it's a shortcut to the restaurant. And I say, no, I'm going to go around the lit way. I may get there later. I may be hungry by the time I get there, but I'm going to go around the long way. You may make it through that dark alley unscathed. And you may look at me when I get to the restaurant and say, I told you so. I'm done eating my food. But here's the deal, Mark. That doesn't mean it was a good decision. All right. It does not mean it was a good decision. And I think the probabilities of this not working out, as opposed to you walking through a dark alley, are much higher. So that's all I'll say. To me, what it looks like from the outside is that Kirk is putting all his chips on this move, just hoping that Brian can do it. He's giving Brian everything he can possibly give him. He's giving him the entire offense, and now he's giving him the quarterback coaching position, which are two very, very important responsibilities. And it's ride or die. And I don't. Maybe it'll work. I don't have reason to believe it will, but I don't believe it's fair to the program or the fan base, Mark, because to me, he's betting the fan base. He's betting the program. You can look at the program as a pile of poker chips. He's putting all those chips in the middle of the table, hoping that he rolls snake eyes. And that's frustrating to me because Kirk has given a lot to the program, but the program's given him a lot. And this is as critical as I've ever been of Kirk Ferentz, Mark. You know this, but I mean, we've been doing shows here for a year now. This is as critical as I've ever been of Kirk Ferentz directly. I've been critical of Ken and Brian at times. I am disturbed by this move today. I hope it ends up working out. But man, to look at this from a reasonable standpoint and say that promoting Brian Ferentz as quarterbacks coach was the best move they could make, to me, appears to be absurd. And it's nothing personal towards Brian or Kirk. We're just talking credentials.
And the offense was so poor statistically last year, to your point. Anyone who the odds say that as long as you run plays, you run reasonable concepts, both in the passing game and the running game, that you have more, meaning Iowa has more talent than, even on offense, than 75 or 80% of the country, that if you just run your offense, it's almost impossible statistically to get worse. So, UConn, UMass, et cetera, on down the line continue to be abysmal because they have the worst talent in the country. So Iowa could raise its level of offensive production by 25 spots, and that's still not what they should be striving for. It's still not a success.
Right. And like I said, chances are anybody who's back there will improve somewhat, because you literally cannot be much worse. And if they're much worse, I mean, you know how great that defensive unit was, and you know how great special teams were for Iowa last year. We've talked about the schedule and how much more difficult it gets. Now, here's the other wild card that still is out there. We need to at least acknowledge the fact that the Raiders' tight end position has presumably not been filled yet. So could we speculate and say that this move was made with the idea from Kirk that Brian is actually headed out the door, and that way the move is already made and they can go hire an OC/QB's coach? Because that's typically what we've talked about that with the exception of a few like Lincoln Riley, who's a head coach and QB's position coach. Typically you have your offensive coordinator also coaching quarterbacks. So is it possible that Kirk has an idea that Brian is going to get hired somewhere, and this move is just setting up a bigger move after that? I suppose, but that would be surprising. And here's the other part of this. Pete Thamel reported this initially. He said his sources that were anonymous were reporting that Brian Ferentz is being elevated to quarterbacks coach, and then of course Abdul Hodge is taking the tight ends coach position. Chad Leistico of the Des Moines Register, through his independent sources, as he stated, told him that there was going to be a formal announcement from the university this afternoon. Well, it's almost 5:00. I have not heard anything, Mark. Nothing official. Well, I actually just got an email as I was saying that. No, nothing. So unless I'm missing something, and I'm on the university's press release list, I have not gotten anything. Now, I could also see this be a situation if the sources that Lystico was using were not Kirk Ferentz himself, and I don't know if they were or not, but if they were not, I could see Kirk waiting a while before announcing it, just to kind of to go against the grain a bit. But I expect Pete Thamel to be very, very. He's not going to report something that doesn't have substance, and But again, the other part of this, Mark, is if that was reasonable to think that Kirk is actually just promoting Brian to QB's coach slash OC as a stopgap on a temporary basis until he gets hired at Oakland. My question is, why would you even make that move now? Why not? I mean, like, if is Abdul Hodge such a hot commodity that you have to hire him right now? Like, if you're going to do that, why wouldn't you just wait until Brian takes the job, and then you can hire Abdul Hodge at the same time as you hire whoever else, or just hire him right after Brian leaves? So that would tell me the fact that they are making this move now, when I don't know that they would have to, because I don't think Abdul Hodge is probably going anywhere else. That would tell me that notion is probably false. That's probably not happening. But I will still, I think a lot of fans will still remain hopeful about potentially, because I've never actually, I don't know that I've ever said on this show, Brian needs to be fired. I don't know that I've ever said that to anybody. But the fact of the matter is, he is not pleasing the fan base. He's not getting it done on the field as of right now. And now he's taking over a position that has struggled under a quarterbacks coach in Ken O'Keefe, who's coached quarterbacks for decades. And so there's going to be fans who are hopeful that he still leaves that tight ends job. And until that tight ends job with Las Vegas, I keep wanting to say Oakland, with Las Vegas gets filled, I'm going to still be closely monitoring that, because I always think there's a chance.
So I'm not understanding, unless I'm missing something, so you're going to have to explain this, the approach or the strategy of naming him offensive coordinator if you know he's leaving.
Naming him QB's coach, you mean?
Or QB's coach, yes.
Well,
he was offensive coordinator.
He was the OC and tight ends coach. So I guess what I'm saying is the replacement for Brian Ferentz,
sure,
is probably going to want to coach the offense and quarterbacks. So by hiring a tight ends coach now and saying we're just moving Brian Ferentz to the quarterback position, that would open the door when Brian decides to leave, when he gets hired in the NFL. It would potentially open the door for a bigger name to come in here. And there's no confusion that he's coaching quarterbacks in OC, which is what Brian Ferentz had presumably been promoted to do, if that makes sense. I'm not saying it's sound reasoning or logic. I'm just saying, is there a chance that's what's happening here?
If I'm running the show, and whether I know that he's leaving or not, I don't see the harm in just naming the roles as what they are going to be, meaning that Abdul Hodge is hired and you relieve Ferentz of the tight ends position, give that to Hodge, and you already had a designated quarterbacks coach, and lead people to believe that you're going to hire a quarterbacks coach.
Well, yeah, let's remember this too. The Iowa athletic department isn't always very good with PR. So, like, Gary Barta has been a disaster with PR since he's been here. We've talked about that on the show as well, whether it be extending Fran McCaffrey in the middle of losing a terrible, one of his worst seasons since his first year here. The incident with Gary Dolphin and his suspension. I won't get into that. That was controversial. You have the Jane Meyer situation with field hockey. I mean, you go down the list. So I'm not saying it's smart, but a lot of things that I've seen the Iowa athletic department do from a hiring and personnel standpoint hasn't made much sense. And I'm just saying, regardless of the reason, Iowa fans, I think, should still be somewhat intrigued by who gets hired at Las Vegas, because those rumors were, I think those rumors were legit. That Brian was looking at leaving. I don't think those, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think there was some fire there. Doesn't mean he's going to get hired, and doesn't mean that plans haven't changed. doesn't mean that he's decided to stay or he realized he can't go to the league. But until that position under Josh McDaniels gets filled, that's the only position besides assistant special teams coach, I believe, with Oakland that has not been filled yet. So I would anticipate it's going to be filled soon. My understanding is that Andrew Peltzner, I believe is his name, tight ends coach for Cleveland, had been interviewed for the OC job. And then he was rumored to be interviewed for the tight ends job once the Raiders OC job got taken. He has been promoted to QB's coach at Cleveland. So I'm assuming he's off the board for Oakland at their tight end coach position. So I don't know. Let's just see what happens. I did see a comment from the real Hayden who wanted me to relay this. And Mark, you may have heard this because I know you were on the show earlier when we talked about it live. But I can confirm through a very, very, very reliable source with 100% certainty on this that North Dakota State passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach Randy Hedberg, who I named as my number one candidate to be the replacement, his camp reached out to Kirk Ferentz and Iowa because he was interested in the job. He was turned down, and the reason was because Brian Ferentz is going to be the next quarterbacks coach at Iowa. So just swallow that. Just process that for a second, Mark. Process the fact that Iowa turned down a quarterbacks coach who in the last 7 years has produced 2 NFL first-round draft from an FCS level, one of which was a 0-star in Carson Wentz, Easton Stick, who's on a roster, and Trey Lance, who was a first-round. 3 in the last 7 years. I can't do what he would have taken as far as money. I don't think money would have been an issue. My understanding is that Randy probably not making anywhere close to what Iowa was paying Ken O'Keefe, nowhere close to it. And he was the passing game coordinator, a higher position, I guess. But the point is, Iowa turned him down for Brian Ferentz to be the quarterback's coach. So I don't want to hear this narrative that this defeatist attitude that people have, Mark. You hear it all the time. Why would anybody want to come play quarterback for Iowa, Mark? Why would anybody want to do that? Why would any coach want to come here and coach quarterbacks? That is such a defeatist attitude, and it's completely false. Okay. So again, Randy Hedberg reached out to Iowa. They turned him down. So take that and run with it. If you think Brian Ferentz is more qualified to be the quarterback's coach, you have the right to that opinion. Again, I'm not stating my opinion with any view to Brian Ferentz as a person, to Kirk Ferentz as a person. I'm just talking about resume. And you compare Randy Hedberg's resume to Brian Ferentz. The fact that they weren't even willing to interview Randy Hedberg, that's just alarming and all the above.
There's nothing involved in Iowa's talent acquisition or ability to produce NFL draft selections or ability to pay a quarterback's coach, as we just saw, that substantiates the narrative of some people that you just outlined. Maybe the only thing would be that some qualified offensive coaches would not want to coach at Iowa unless they were given confirmation that they would be able to have a large amount of say and power in the play calling and in the process. That's the only deterrent I can think of with this program that may fail to yield top-notch offensive personnel on the coaching staff.
But Mark, that goes right back to that's not a culture. That's not a program problem or a locale problem. That still comes back to coaching and administration. If you're not willing to bring in somebody who's more qualified than you are to operate the passing game, like Randy Hedberg is not just the quarterback's coach at North Dakota State, he's the passing game coordinator. So their head coach recognizes that, hey, I know less about passing and quarterback play than you do. So I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to give you that responsibility. That's called humility. It's recognizing that somebody else knows more about it than you do as the head coach. And I don't think Kirk Ferentz would ever claim that he's a passing game expert. His expertise is the offensive line, and that's great. There isn't a head coach out there that is a position coach. Everyone, these successful head coaches aren't micromanaging every position on the field. That's why you have position coaches that are more than qualified and more qualified than you are. And that's just normal. No head coach. Nick Saban's not micromanaging each position on the field. So just the fact that somebody as qualified as Randy was interested is unbelievable in itself. Isn't that unbelievable in itself, Mark? I mean, it would make sense, because if he's not making anywhere close to what I see Nick, and I can't validate this. I see Nick in the chat says he found that Randy was making 104 a year. I can't validate that. I'm assuming Nick Googled that. I really haven't looked into what Randy was making. I'm sure that's public information. But I guess what I'm saying is it would make sense that he'd want to come here, but you always have that in the back of your mind that, maybe the naysayers are true. Maybe maybe they couldn't land a big name. But Mark, I told you this last week. Is there anybody in the country that would be more qualified to come here, that would be a reasonable get than Randy Hedberg? I brought up Yost from Florida International, who's coached a number of NFL quarterbacks. I mean, Lincoln Riley, I guess you could say, might be more qualified. He's not coming here. He's the head coach at USC. I'm just saying of reasonable gets, he would have been a slam dunk. And there's just a lot of frustration. I can tell from the fan base. I read a lot of comments on social media today. There are a few people who are defending Kirk, but again, he's not above criticism, and this is a move that I just don't get.
We'll get to this super chat contribution. In that way, we can work our way through the rest of the comments and questions coming in online. Springtime, we appreciate your contribution. Corey, I watched your show this afternoon, and this line is perfect. Brian Ferentz is offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. That's a bold play, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off.
Is that a movie quote?
It must be, because that I assumed when I started to read that the line in question was a line that came out of your mouth.
No. I've never used. I don't know what that's from. I'm assuming that's a movie quote, and do appreciate that from Springtime 0502. Again, I keep saying it, Mark. If you're an Iowa fan, and listen, I'm a fan at heart. I'm a talking head, but I'm a fan at heart. The bottom line is I'm going to be rooting hard for Brian Ferentz if he's the coordinator and quarterbacks coach in the fall. That's what I think any fan that, unless we're talking about like a Penn State-esque issue where we're talking like morality is at stake, sure, or legality is at stake, then I can see not rooting for your own team. But there's no reason not to root for Brian Ferentz to succeed. But that doesn't mean, just because you criticize him now doesn't mean you're sacrilegious or you're a blasphemer. You can be a fan and be critical, and that's what I am today, big time.
So Springtime
like
has
from Nick
spurred
as well.
others
good
on
Moneyball
to
quote there.
Yes, they've spurred others on to draw from their favorite movie lines. I feel like quoting Brad Pitt.
What a great movie
Moneyball.
too.
Yes, tremendous movie.
Just a great movie.
There are rich teams, there are poor teams, then there's 3 layers of crap, then there's us.
It's a great movie. I saw that for the first time. I want to say it was last summer, maybe. I hadn't seen it, and
okay.
Actually, Don Patterson's the one who told me to watch it, so I watched it and I loved it. I'm not a baseball guy either. I loved it.
Yes, love that. Certainly lived as a fan through it, so I could relate to it. And yeah, I'm a baseball guy at heart. I got my serious face on. Well, I'm channeling Corey right now, so I'm taking this rather seriously.
You remember my mood a week or two ago? Like, I like Ken O'Keefe. I think he's a great guy, but I thought it was an opportunity for Iowa to really do something with that position and to change things. Whether Kirk was, I don't think Kirk was asked to step down. Now that we see what the result was, I think there was that question, like, did Kirk talk to Kenny and say, hey, it's really not working here, Ken. I love you. You're like a brother to me, but it's just not working. And perhaps it's time. But I don't think that happened, Mark, because You really think he did that? Maybe he did. Maybe he did do that to make Brian the quarterback's coach, but I just can't. I can't imagine that that's the case. So I would say that Ken O'Keefe stepped aside on his own accord, and the solution was, well, let's just make Brian. That's typically what OCs do, is they coach quarterbacks, and even though Brian has no experience doing so, let's go ahead and have him coach quarterbacks. And I'm guessing they'll still send their quarterbacks out to the East Coast to train with Tony Rasiopi in New Jersey. That seems to be the going thing, Mark. And somebody asked earlier, will they give him a raise? Because Ken O'Keefe was making $650. Brian was making around $8. Will they give him a raise? Shame on them if they do. Shame on them if they do. How do you give him a raise, Mark? How do you do that? I mean, you cannot do that at this point. And I don't know what they're going to be paying Abdul Hodge, but it ain't gonna be no $650. So they're going to have some extra money there, and I hope that they, I don't know, give more to Phil Parker or LeVar Woods or someone who, as of right now, has proven themselves.
My approach to raises is pretty cut and dry, that you agree to a salary for any new employee, and we'll stick to football, of course, based on their resume, based on their track record elsewhere. So their ability to negotiate a salary is based on what they have performed. And then you kind of wipe the record clean. And let's say somebody makes $1 million a year. Well, then you judge their performance and evaluate their performance based on the expectations of the role, based on what other people make in the industry. And you may blow up a contract from time to time and renegotiate because that person is that good. But otherwise, if they underperform, and you have the choice to either retain them and overpay them or cut them loose. But that there should be no raises given unless somebody far exceeds expectations.
Well, Iowa just gave Kirk Ferentz a raise and an extension through 2029, Mark.
What is he making?
So that's not how, unfortunately. Say it again.
What is he making per year? Do you know?
$7 million, I think. I think it's $7 million. I'd look back at the contract with everything. I think it's around $7 million.
I don't have too much problem with that. Based on his performance, he should be getting top 15 to 20 money in the country. But I would also add, because of the stability, the tenure that he's built there, I can understand him making more than that.
Well, is it wrong for fans to every once in a while want a conference championship? Is it wrong for fans every once in a while to just once to actually make a playoff? Now, you can say the playoff hasn't been around for what? Has it been around for what, 9 years now, Mark? Am I right in saying
8?
This is year number 9? 8, okay.
I'm sorry, Corey. We just lost you for whatever it was, 20 or 30 seconds. Yeah, 8 years of the playoff.
Is it wrong to want to be elite every once in a while?
Based on what I see out of Iowa, based on what I know of watching Iowa football for longer than I would care to admit, I don't see, I see the only drawback to Iowa football inherently is the location in regards to recruiting and signing players. Much like Nebraska, much like Wisconsin, much like others. But they have certainly shown the ability to recruit beyond what's in the immediate geographical area, number one, and number two, more importantly, develop way past what they recruit. So if you look at the last 20 years and look at what 2002 and 3 and 4 yielded, in 2008 and 9 and 2015, no, it's not unrealistic to think that Iowa, and I know that just in the very recent past that they've been on par with Wisconsin, but they certainly have not won a Big Ten championship for 18 years, and Wisconsin has won a handful of them in that time.
That they haven't won one outright since what, 1985? They haven't won an outright Big Ten title since, was it 85?
Yes.
So I mean, I just you and I've had a lot of people who, you know, as we've been critical of the offense during the past couple months, I've had a lot of people ripping me because, oh, you don't appreciate 10 wins, you know, go hide in your closet. Well, that's fine, but you have to be realistic here. They weren't even close to winning the Big Ten. They got beat 42-3 against Michigan. They got curb stomped at home to Purdue, and they got curb stomped at home on the road to Wisconsin. That's a fact. Now maybe 10-4 with 3 curb stompings and those losses maybe that's okay with you. That's fine. You're welcome to be okay with that, but it's also okay for the fans who want to be competitive, and even in your losses. I mean, just be competitive in those losses. And the bottom line is, with if quarterback play doesn't take a big step forward, Mark, they're not going to be able to get close to achieving 10 wins in the regular season again. I could see, maybe I can squint and see 8, and if I take a pill, if I pop a pill, I can see, okay. But even that is hard for me to see right now with Michigan on the schedule, and Ohio State and Wisconsin, and I think a very improved Nebraska team. I think you're going to see an improved Illinois team, although that's, you know, we'll see the attrition. Purdue's going to. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult to piece together wins. And here's what Iowa fans really have to hope for. Even if the ship has sailed on quarterback play being good, maybe it can improve a bit. I hope it can. But even if you don't want to put your trust in that, what you really want to be putting your trust in right now, or hoping, is that the running back room, that might be the biggest storyline, the offensive line and the running backs, because we saw in 2020, Iowa got away with poor quarterback play in 2020, went 6-2. And you can argue they got away with it last year as well. But man, they were good on defense and special teams. I think they were better than in 2020. I'd have to look back at the numbers. But they got away with poor quarterback play in 2020, primarily because they had a really good running attack. I mean, they were averaging like maybe a little under 4.5 carry. That's a really good rushing attack. And they took big step backward in that regard in 2021. So part of that may have been COVID and teams not at full strength in 2020. Certainly Wisconsin was a good example of that. I think Minnesota, I don't know if they had issue game against Iowa in 2020. But my point is, the games where Iowa ran the ball well are games where they typically don't run the ball well, like Wisconsin and Minnesota. But if Iowa can get rushing production this year from LaShawn Williams, from Gavin Williams, and perhaps one of the 2 freshmen, it's not a real deep room, but if they can get solid to really solid production, you're going to be able to still win a number of games. I still don't think you're going to win 10, but you're going to be able to overshadow really bad quarterback play.
Springtime 0502. Okay, letting us know the movie Dodgeball. A little extra. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Springtime. So to go back, Corey, to the point that you just wrapped up prior to that one about the schedule and the expectations of the fans. This is the way I look at Iowa football, and this is to Iowa's credit. Iowa's not Northwestern, Illinois, even Minnesota in its own division. It's not Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers. What I'm alluding to, and even Michigan State, that Iowa can field at times poor football teams, and the support of that fan base is top of the line. There's about 4 or 5 programs in the Big Ten that are going to support an off year. And Nebraska is one of them. Iowa and Wisconsin are there as well. I guess we don't know about Ohio State. I saw it once or twice, not even really in the 80s anyway. We haven't really seen it with Michigan, although they packed the house for some bad Rich Rod seasons. But the point being that this fan base is there, packing the stadium when there are marginal seasons or off seasons. So the loyalty is there, arguably as high as it is anywhere in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and so going back to the Brian Ferentz hire, the only way that Brian Ferentz the only way this move is not going to actually hold true is if the fans revolt, and I don't want that because I don't think it ends well for Kirk Ferentz if that happens. But we've talked about it, Mark. Change is not going to happen unless the people who are, making big donations, the people who are paying, in some cases, thousands of dollars for season tickets for their families, unless those people start to say no, we're not renewing. And I think that's going to be happening soon. Maybe it's already happened where they start asking for money for next year's season tickets. It'll be interesting to see what people do, because there are some of the big donors who I think Kirk can do no wrong, Mark. But I have to think there's a number of them that are frustrated by this move. And I know the real Hayden brought up earlier that he got rid of his season tickets. It's going to take more than one person. And I guarantee there will be others, but will it be enough? I question that, because you're right. The Iowa fan base is loyal, and I wouldn't say loyal to a fault. I think Kirk sometimes has been loyal to a fault, but the Iowa fans are just loyal to the Iowa program. There's no pro sports teams here in Iowa. We know that. It will be interesting to see. I'm anxious to see when this gets announced officially, because it still hasn't been announced. I'm just checking my phone to make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, I still have not seen anything official from Iowa, so we'll see if it gets announced today or not. But when it does, it'll be interesting to see how people react.
Erica, good to see you here. Thanks for being here. Thank you for the contribution. Do you guys think Kirk Ferentz will outstay his welcome? I think he is at risk of doing that given recent events.
Well, I've said
personally think
that's my biggest fear with.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my biggest fear, Mark, is Kirk Ferentz outstaying his welcome, because I don't know that Hayden Fry did that. Hayden Fry, he just got old and it just didn't work there the last year or two. But for the most part, fans still, his legacy is not tarnished. And I think what I don't want is for Kirk to damage his legacy, because he's done great things here. But you don't want him to go down as the guy that was just loyal to his son over everything else. And we're not asking, people aren't asking for Brian to just be homeless. I mean, the guy's been making nearly $1 million a year. He's a very intelligent human being. I'm sure he can go out and get a position job anywhere and make a great living. So nobody's asking Kirk to just abandon his son to the wolves. But the point is, you don't want Kirk Ferentz to go down as the guy that won a lot of games here, but could not get past loyalty to his own flesh and blood. And that's too bad. That's why when he was hired, when Brian Ferentz was hired and then eventually promoted as OC, it was hard to justify it, because you could see these problems looming. Everybody assumed that the plan was for Brian Ferentz to eventually become the head coach, and it seems like Kirk Ferentz still is trying to make that happen. As many problems as Iowa's had, from performance to off the field issues, it seems like that's still in the works, at least from Kirk's perspective. At least these moves would tell you so.
You would have to think that Kirk Ferentz's legacy and how he is viewed and the level of success is going to be evaluated much different 5 to 6 years after his last season, once another coach comes in and either upgrades the situation, or maybe they're not as successful, or whatever the outcome is. It only makes sense that it's going to reflect on Kirk's 20 plus years.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to, and That's too bad. That's why another reason why fans should hope we got to hope that Brian Ferentz gets the job done. There's no reason to root against Brian Ferentz. He's trying to living. I'm sure he's trying his best to fix the offense. That doesn't mean he's doing a good job or he's qualified, but as long as he's here, root for him. And I understand people like the real Hayden who canceled season tickets. And I know you didn't cancel them today over this specific issue, but I also understand someone who takes action. It's their money. It's their right to do what they want with it. And I don't hold it against anybody that decides to take action based upon a move that they don't view as fair to the program. Yeah, Ryan says literally nobody will cancel season tickets over this. That's not true. I mean, respectfully, Ryan, that's not true. I guarantee you there will be people who will not renew because they're so fed up with this and they were hopeful that there would be a major change. And I'm not saying it'll be a grand exit, but there will be people who are fed up with it because of this move, because they believe it's an indication of just refusal to change, refusal to accept the problems and acknowledge the problems. I don't know why there wouldn't be fans that cancel.
I actually posted that comment because I thought you just had cited a comment in the live chat of somebody canceling their season tickets.
The real Hayden canceled his season tickets. He told us that earlier. I don't believe it was in response to this move. Okay. I think he had canceled in response to just the abysmal offense. Explain it, real Hayden. You're here all the time. Explain it too. When did you cancel your season tickets? I like I said, I don't think it was this morning. So,
oh boy, yeah. We should. I shouldn't say we. I will bring it back to myself. Should have seen this coming because again, once I saw the news, I thought this is an Iowa move. This should have been predicted.
It is. It is indeed. And one thing we haven't brought up, Mark, is yesterday's news that Lafayette transfer Steven Stilianos did commit to Iowa. So they finally get one. Finally get somebody in the portal, whether that's the guy you wanted or not. They do get somebody who I think has a lot of talent and has the potential of making an impact here. It'll be interesting to see if he plays much this year, though, because I really think that Sam Laporta and Luke Lachey are a pretty darn good 1-2 punch, especially Sam Laporta. I mean, barring some injury, Steven Stilianos is not going to be the starting tight end this year. And he's got 2 years of eligibility, so he'll have a chance to come back next year. So he'll provide depth there, but I wouldn't call that a marquee ad, Mark. I mean, it's a good ad, no question, but it provides some good depth, and injuries can happen. That's a factor as well, but it's not a marquee ad. But a good one. I mean, they needed to get somebody just from I think just from a outside perspective, they needed to get somebody. They needed to get somebody just to change the narrative, because there are people who, it's another thing people are upset about, and I have been critical of it, not being able to go grab somebody in the portal, because they've actually went after people. They haven't went after a quarterback, but they went after a running back. They went after a tackle, defensive end. They haven't been able to nab anybody until Steven Stilianos. Mark, not to be critical of Steven Stilianos, he was probably my last pick on the list, because I just don't think there's a great need at tight end. There's a greater need at defensive end and at tackle especially. There's a really big need at quarterback, but we know they're not interested in going to the portal at quarterback. Now, how about this, Mark? What happens if now that Brian Ferentz is the offensive coordinator, or excuse me, the quarterback's coach, maybe he'll go out and grab Jaden Daniels or JT Daniels? What if he does that? How will that change the mindset of Iowa fans? If next week we hear the first thing he does, that would be the one thing, Mark. That would be the one thing that would, I think, the people who are upset by this move, and there are a lot of them, that might be the one thing that would quiet them and give them pause that, hey, maybe Ken had more say in the personnel decisions than we think. And now that Brian is here, he's going to get, if that happened, and I don't see it happening, but I'm just saying, if they went and got Jaden Daniels, then all bets are off.
It would quiet me as well,
because
I think that's at least 80% of the production at quarterback is the talent of the player that's taking the starts, even beyond the development, which is certainly important. And the play calling itself is, and now you mentioned Jaden Daniels. I don't think he was available at during last week's show. So he has been added to JT Daniels, the two Daniels, as available quarterbacks, and they're both better than Spencer Petras.
Jaden Daniels is fun to watch too. Like JT Daniels, I don't know. He's a pocket passer. He's a pro-style quarterback, right, Mark?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's probably how you'd describe JT Daniels. But Jaden Daniels is a dual threat guy, and you know, he would be totally different than anything Iowa's had since at least Brad Banks. But again, I have no reason to think that's going to happen. I'm that out there as a hypothetical. If it were to happen, how would it change the narrative? And I would certainly shift it a bit. And just for the record, Mark, you brought up, you believe that talent ultimately is what tells the story between, with quarterback play. I mean, you said, I think 80% talent. You can argue that. I know Spencer Petras was a low 4-star according to some metrics, high 3-star. I mean, I know that's not JT Daniels as far as recruiting, but it's not like he was a slouch on the recruiting front. He was a fairly highly touted kid. I mean, he was wanted, going back through his offer list. Of course, he had committed, I believe, to Oregon State initially. Had been offered by Cal. I'm trying to find other Power 5 programs in here. Syracuse offered him, and then he had some a group of 5 offers. So yeah, I mean, not real highly recruited, but they have not gotten all of Spencer Petras. They've not gotten what they can out of Spencer. I mean, I think he's got some intangibles that are positive. I think he's got a good arm. We've seen him really make nice throws at times, but that's why I don't go on here, Mark. Do you ever hear me go on here and just rip Spencer Petras? Do you ever hear me actually just come on here and rip him? If I'm on here, I'm criticizing the coaches for not doing more with what they have, or not going to the portal to change who they have. But I'm not sitting here ripping Spencer because he is a product of his coaches.
Yeah, they're college athletes, and as long as they are being good teammates and they're putting in the effort and doing their best on the field, I do my best to evaluate without criticizing like you may a professional. Certainly. Erica, thank you for encouraging everyone to hit the like button in whatever style or fashion that they would choose. You like to do it lightly and gracefully. Jerry, thank you for that as well. Let's take this opportunity to let everyone know that Corey covers Iowa football and basketball there at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. So get on over there to catch Corey's latest on this topic, again, as he took your calls this afternoon, and then the latest on Iowa's run to the Big Ten tournament. Do they allow all the teams in the Big Ten tournament still? Do they all make it?
They all make it.
Okay.
Bottom 4 have to play Wednesday now that we have 14 teams. Yeah. And the top 4 get a double bye. Iowa's still in competition. They're still in contention for a double bye. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they can get that. They've won 7 of 8 now, Mark. So Iowa basketball trending in the right direction. Caitlin Clark for the women just was named Big Ten Player of the Year today. She was also named Big Ten Player of the Week, no surprise. And then, of course, the women won a share of the Big Ten title Sunday night by beating Michigan in Iowa City, blowing out Michigan in Iowa City. So good things with Iowa athletics. And I mean, this is one piece of news that's significant because it's football and it's the biggest revenue sport within the program. But some good things happening on the basketball front right now.
I'm in the process of producing program rankings all time. So I am going through a series of metrics for certainly every Power 5 and beyond in the country. And so I'll be releasing that series hopefully next week. We'll release that series next week. Also, I'm going to be taking everyone's calls tonight at, 8:30. So we've got our Nebraska show from 7 to 8 Eastern, 6 to 7 Central. And then a half hour after that, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern, taking your calls. And our topic for tonight, as Corey has inspired me, is we're going to be filling in those DBU, wide receiver U, tight end U, on down the line. And I want to take everyone's suggestions. And I've got a banner that's going to be presented for each position group to give my initial thoughts as to who's under consideration. Want to hear from all of you. And then we're going to do some level of series attacking all the position groups in college football and which school should be considered to be the top producer for that particular unit. Again, DBU is often thrown out there, tight end U, in which Iowa certainly has a legitimate claim.
I think they should be in the conversation for DBU. Should Iowa not be, at least in the conversation?
In the conversation, I don't think they're close to the.
No, probably not.
Like, yeah, but in the conversation, sure. In the top 10, I sent you, and certainly I didn't want to send this in any way as to say this is the official. This cannot be criticized. It was ESPN's look at it maybe a year or two ago, and they were going post 1998 since that's the BCS era. So the last 20 some years of college football, and they were giving a top 10 in each positional unit, had Iowa at number 2 on the tight ends list. And I think they were in the top 10 in the DB list, I believe, which is a pretty competitive list.
What has Miami done at tight end in the past 2 to 3 years since that article? I'm curious. I really don't know.
They have some very talented players. In terms of producing anyone, they why can I not think of the player that just was their tight end this past season? He's going into the NFL draft. Oh my word. Why I can't remember his name. But anyway, he will be drafted. The Miami tight end from this, it's not David Njoku, who's already in the NFL with the Browns. Shoot. Can't think.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think Iowa's in prime. The reason I ask is I think Iowa's in prime position to produce another one this coming year in Sam Laporta. I think he'll be
sure.
We talked about him last week as we previewed the tight ends last week. So if you missed that show, definitely go back and watch it. But yeah, Sam Laporta has an opportunity to, I think, be a top 4 round draft pick next year, maybe higher. I think he's got the intangibles. So Iowa's sticking, that's one thing too with this Brian Ferentz moving him to the quarterback position and having Abdul Hodge coach tight ends. Maybe that'll work as well. I saw somebody wanted me to address the Abdul Hodge hire. I don't have a problem with it per se. I question, was Abdul Hodge the best name out there because he hasn't coached tight ends that I'm aware of? He's a linebacker in college. He's an outside linebackers coach at South Dakota. So I think he's a great guy, and he's a really good player here. And I think he's going to be good for, again, the culture. But Brian Ferentz is probably the most qualified person there to coach tight ends. I know LeVar Woods did briefly, and they've shifted some guys around. LeVar Woods is a former linebacker, so I guess you can make that claim. It's not saying it can't work, but I hope that I think they will. They've been able to sustain good tight end production for the length of Ferentz's career. So I think my guess is that they'll be able to mold Abdul Hodge and it'll work just fine. But anyways, I think at this point it's just a wait and see on the Abdul Hodge hire. I'm having a hard time coming to terms with the news from Brian today. But again, nothing official from the university yet. So we'll see. I'm going to be intrigued to see how Kirk and the university swings this in a press release. I'm guessing they won't have a press conference, but I'm guessing they'll release a statement here soon.
All right, Corey, when is the next content to be released, whether football or basketball, on From the Hawkeye of the Storm?
That's a good question. Thursday night, we will be live, 8 o'clock tip for Iowa, Michigan from Ann Arbor. We'll be live with Coach Gary Close. He'll be on a beach somewhere in South Carolina, but we'll be live with him. And about 10 o'clock Central Time following Iowa, Michigan. Big game. 2 big games left on the schedule, the regular season mark, at Michigan, at Illinois. 2 opportunities for quad 1 wins for the Hawks. So, we'll be live on my channel From the Hawkeye of the Storm.
I will see everyone in less than 25 minutes over on the Nebraska channel, talking Huskers. And as was stated by, I apologize for not taking note of who made that statement, but a Hawkeyes fan in here said, hey, head on over. I believe it was Cole that said, yes, head on over to the Nebraska channel. It's fun talking to the enemy. So come on over, talk some Nebraska football in 25 minutes on the Nebraska channel. And then we have a huge day on Wednesday, as we typically do, starting at 12:30 Eastern time. Oklahoma, Ohio State, Michigan, Florida State, Miami. 5 live streams. So check out those respective channels. And if you just want to see our Voice of College Football Network grow, our next one in line would be Notre Dame. Needs about 35 to 40 subs to get to 1,000. The 1,000 mark is key, just in regards to YouTube traffic and YouTube taking you seriously. So we'll say that. Subscribe to our Notre Dame channel. All right, Corey. Next week, we can continue our series of breaking down position by position. We've looked at the tight ends and the running backs.
Let's look at offensive line next week. Does that sound good to you?
Okay. Sounds good.
We'll look at the line next week.
And great offensive lineman. You could be in that conversation all time as well.
Absolutely. Well, what Iowa needs is a complete unit this next year. It's a really, really important position battle this spring. So that'll be a fun one next Tuesday. Awesome.
Corey, thank you so much for all that you do. Again, everyone head on over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday at 4:30 Central, 5:30 Eastern